Hello, and okay, welcome to part three of the of chapter one. So we're going to conclude this with how life evolves. Okay, so what is evolution? So Darwin and Wallace made two claims regarding the natural world. One was that species are related by common ancestry. The other is that characteristics of species can be modified from generation to generation. And so Darwin called this descent with modification. So evolution is a change in characteristics of a population over time. Species are related to one another and can change through time. So a population is a group of individuals of the same species. So they're also living in the same area at the same time. Natural selection explains how evolution occurs. The two conditions that must be met for natural selection to occur in a population are that individuals must vary in characteristics that are heritable, which just means that they can be passed on onto the offspring. And also, in a particular environment, certain versions of these heritable traits help individuals succeed and reproduce more than others. So, certain heritable traits lead to increased success in producing offspring. Traits become more, and then traits become more common in a population over time. So, natural selection acts on individuals, but the evolutionary change occurs in populations. And speciation occurs when populations diverge to form new species. Fitness is the ability of an individual to produce offspring. Individuals with higher fitness will produce more offspring and also more offspring that survive than others. Adaptation is a trait that increases fitness of an individual in a particular environment. So, for example, if we look at finches on the Galapagos Islands, after increased rainfall, if you have small, soft seeds that become more abundant, then you'll have finches with small, pointed beaks having higher fitness. So, small, pointed beaks, in this case, are an adaptation that increases the finch's ability to survive. And so, finches with small, pointed beaks increase in the population than, finches with either bigger sized beaks or maybe just broader beaks. And so the tree of life depicts evolutionary history. It shows a family tree of organisms. It describes genealogical relationships among the species with a single ancestral species at the root or the base of the tree. In a phylogeny, you get the actual genealogical relationships among the organisms. So how is genetic variation analyzed? Well, biologists study RNA and DNA from different organisms. And then what they do is they compare sequences of the building blocks. So like the ones we discussed in the previous section, the building blocks, A, T, C, and G. When you have fewer sequence variations between two species, that indicates that those two species are closely related. So if we look at these examples with the gene sequences of land plants, green algae, and brown algae, we're looking at the basis of each group. And so if we look at green algae and we compare the green algae to both land plants and brown algae, we'll see that there are more differences between green algae and brown algae than there are differences between green algae and land plants. So if we go base by base, so the first one is the same, the second base, there's a difference between the green algae and the brown algae, third is the same, fourth the same, fifth same, seventh same, eighth the same, and then the ninth, there's another difference. So there's two differences between green algae and brown algae. But if we compare green algae to land plants, you're only going to see one difference, and that's going to be with the C and the G. All the other ones are the same. So because there's fewer differences between land plants and green algae, that means that these are more closely related. Okay. A phylogenetic tree is used to show the relationships between species. In a phylogenetic tree, branches that share a more recent common ancestor represents more closely related species. Branches that don't share a recent common ancestor represent species that are more distantly related. Okay, so the tree of life is made by it's made it's estimated from genetic data. Okay. So here we have an example of a phylogenetic tree. And so if we look, and so remember, branches that share a recent common ancestor represent species that are more closely related. Okay. So if we look at domain Eukarya and we compare the uh, fungi and animals, we'll see that these two share a recent common ancestor. Whereas if we compare fungi and land plants, well, those two would have a more distant common ancestor. So because fungi and land plants have a more distant common ancestor than fungi and animals, that lets you know that fungi and animals are more closely related than fungi and land plants. So the tree of life indicates three major groups of organisms. So the first one is the domain Eukarya. So those are the eukaryotes. So these are a group that has these are groups of animals that have a nucleus. And then you have two groups of prokaryotes, which are the animals, or I shouldn't say animals, the organisms without a nucleus. So that includes domain bacteria and archaea. Okay. And so here you can see an example of a eukaryotic cell compared to a prokaryotic cell. And so eukaryotic cells have a membrane around the nucleus. So if we look at this example, here you can see the nucleus, and you have a membrane surrounding the nucleus. Prokaryotic cells do not have a membrane-bound nucleus. Okay. The other difference that you'll see is the size. So a eukaryotic cell is 1 micrometer, whereas the prokaryotic cell is 0.1 micrometer. Well, actually, no, I'm sorry. So this just shows you the scale. But if you look at the scale shows that the prokaryotic cell is 1 order of magnitude smaller, so about 10 times smaller than a eukaryotic cell. All right, so taxonomy is the effort to name and classify organisms. A taxon is a named group. The domain was something that was established by Carl Woese, and this created a new taxonomic level. So this consists of three taxa: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. So those are three domains. A phylum is a lineage within a domain. So for example, humans are in the phylum Chordata, right? And that phyla is within the domain Eukarya. So in the 1700s, Carolus Linnaeus established a classification system that is still used today, where each organism is given a unique two-part scientific name that consists of the genus and species. The genus is made up of closely related groups of species, and the species is individuals that regularly breed together or individuals whose characteristics are distinct from those of other species. An organism's genus and species designation is called its scientific name or the Latin name. And scientific names are always italicized or underlined, and genus names are always capitalized. The species names are not capitalized. For example, if you look at Homo sapiens, so Homo would be the genus and sapiens would be the species. Okay. And so we're going to pause there. And so next we'll go over chapter 25. Okay. So I'll see you guys in a little bit.